The morning of November 28th started like any other Thursday in Britain. Commuters filled their cars with petrol, grabbed their coffees, and headed toward the M25, the vital artery that circles London like a concrete lifeline. But by 6:47 a.m., everything changed. The first convoy appeared on the western section near Junction 15. 40 lorries, then 100, then 500. They weren't moving. They were parking, deliberately, strategically. And within 90 minutes, the entire 117-mile ring road had transformed into the largest parking lot in British history. Mark Hendricks, a 42-year-old lorry driver from Grimsby, was among the first to arrive. He had driven through the night, his cab filled with sandwiches, blankets, and a resolve that had been building for months. "We've been ignored for too long," he told reporters through his window, his voice steady but his eyes betraying exhaustion. "The government thinks we'll just accept poverty wages, impossible fuel costs, and regulations that make it impossible to survive." Today, they learned different. By 8 a.m., over 10,000 heavy goods vehicles had taken position. The M25 was no longer a motorway. It was a statement, a rebellion, a line in the asphalt that the government could not ignore. London holds its breath. The immediate impact was catastrophic. Emergency services struggled to reach hospitals. Heathrow Airport, just minutes from the M25, saw flight cancellations spike as crew members couldn't reach terminals. The Port of Tilbury, responsible for nearly a third of Britain's container traffic, ground to a halt. Goods destined for supermarkets, pharmacies, and factories sat motionless in warehouses. Sarah Chen, a nurse at St George's Hospital in Tooting, left for her shift at 6:30 a.m. She arrived at 2:15 p.m., having navigated back roads, walked 3 miles, and hitched a ride on a delivery scooter. "Patients were waiting," she said, tears streaming down her face. "People with heart conditions, stroke victims, cancer treatments. And I couldn't get to them because our entire city is surrounded." The Metropolitan Police deployed every available unit. Commissioner James Rothwell held an emergency press conference at 10 a.m., his face grave. "We are dealing with an unprecedented situation. The M25 is effectively closed. We are urging all residents to stay home, avoid unnecessary travel, and remain calm. We are in dialogue with the protesters." But dialogue seemed impossible. The lorry drivers had one demand, and it was non-negotiable: fair compensation, fuel price caps, and an end to what they called regulatory strangulation that favored foreign haulage companies over British workers. The drivers' desperation. To understand why 10,000 men and women chose to bring a capital city to its knees, you need to understand what led them here. The British haulage industry, once the backbone of the nation's economy, had been hemorrhaging drivers for years. Brexit had choked the flow of European workers. COVID had exposed the fragility of supply chains. And then came the fuel crisis. Diesel prices had soared to record highs. A full tank that once cost £80 now demanded nearly £200. Insurance premiums tripled, road tax increased. Meanwhile, the rates companies paid drivers remained frozen, trapped in contracts signed years ago when the world looked very different. Tommy Walsh, a 56-year-old driver from Belfast who had spent 32 years behind the wheel, put it simply: "I work 70 hours a week and I can't afford to feed my family. My daughter asked me why we don't have heating anymore. What am I supposed to tell her? That daddy's job, the job that used to provide, doesn't pay enough to keep the lights on?" The statistics told a grim story. Over 60,000 drivers had left the profession in the past 18 months. Recruitment had collapsed. The average age of a British lorry driver was now 54. Young people looked at the hours, the pay, the conditions, and chose anything else, anything at all. And so, in closed Facebook groups and encrypted messaging apps, a plan formed. Not violence, not destruction, just a simple, powerful act. Stop moving. Park the lorries. Surround London. Make them see us. The city suffocates. By midday, the reality of isolation set in. Supermarket chains issued statements. Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, all confirmed that deliveries had ceased. Fresh produce, dairy, bread, all the items that required daily restocking would run out within 48 hours. Panic buying erupted. Shelves emptied in Croydon, Bromley, Barking. Fights broke out over milk. Security guards at a Lidl in Tottenham had to lock the doors. The stock market reacted immediately. The FTSE 100 plunged 3.7% in a single trading session. Logistics companies saw their values crater. Online retailers suspended deliveries. Amazon, Ocado, Deliveroo all issued apologetic emails to millions of customers. Your order has been delayed due to unforeseen circumstances. The political fallout was immediate and brutal. Prime Minister Elizabeth Hartley faced a crisis unlike anything in her tenure. Opposition leader Marcus Webb stood in Parliament and delivered a scathing indictment. This government has ignored working people for too long. These drivers aren't criminals. They're not extremists. They're fathers and mothers who can't afford to live. And now, because of this government's neglect, our capital city is under siege. Hartley's response was defensive, halting. We are committed to finding a resolution. Violence and disruption are not the answer. We call on the drivers to return to work so negotiations can begin. But the drivers had heard promises before. They wanted action first, movement second. The human cost. As the sun set on the first day, stories began to emerge that cut through the political noise. A woman in Hackney, 8 months pregnant, went into labour. The ambulance took 2 hours to navigate blocked roads. She delivered in her living room, attended by a neighbour who was a retired midwife. Mother and baby survived, but the terror in her husband's voice during the 999 call would be replayed on news channels for days. An elderly man in Sutton, diabetic and dependent on daily insulin deliveries, rationed his remaining doses. His daughter pleaded on social media, begging anyone with access to get through. A motorcycle courier, risking his license, rode along the hard shoulder of the M25, dodging police, to deliver the life-saving medication. These weren't abstract statistics. They were real people, caught in the crossfire of a battle between desperate workers and an unresponsive government. The lorry drivers weren't immune to the suffering. Many sat in their cabs, watching the news, reading the stories, wrestling with guilt. But they also knew that if they backed down now, nothing would change. The choice was agonizing. Cause pain today, or accept poverty forever. The international spotlight. By evening, the world was watching. CNN ran a breaking news ticker. BBC World Service dedicated entire segments. The New York Times front page featured a satellite image of the M25, ringed with tiny white rectangles, lorries frozen in a perfect circle of defiance. European leaders expressed concern. France offered mediation. Germany's transport minister called it a wake-up call for all of us. The International Transport Workers Federation issued a statement of solidarity, but stopped short of calling for similar actions elsewhere. Social media exploded. The hashtag M25 siege trended globally. Some called the drivers heroes, others called them selfish. Videos went viral, a clip of a driver sharing his lunch with a stranded motorist. Another of a trucker weeping as he explained why he couldn't turn back. The narrative was messy, complicated, and deeply human. The government scrambles. Behind closed doors, panic reigned. Cobra, the government's emergency committee, convened in a windowless room beneath Whitehall. Military options were discussed and immediately dismissed. Forcibly moving 10,000 lorries would require resources Britain didn't have and create a public relations disaster of unimaginable scale. Negotiations were the only path, but who spoke for the drivers? There was no single union, no official leader. The blockade had been organized through grassroots networks, decentralized and leaderless. The government didn't know who to talk to. Finally, a delegation emerged. 5 drivers, elected by their peers through hurried votes in service station, car parks, and WhatsApp polls. They entered Downing Street at 9 p.m., exhausted, unwashed, but determined. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Details were scarce, but sources inside reported shouting, tears, and at one point, a cabinet minister walking out in frustration. The drivers presented their demands in writing: fuel price subsidies for haulage, immediate minimum pay standards, a 6-month grace period on new environmental regulations, and a public commitment, in Parliament, that British drivers would be prioritised in government contracts. The government countered with half measures: a fuel rebate scheme, to be implemented in 6 months, a review of pay standards, with recommendations due in a year. The drivers rejected it immediately. "We're not leaving until we see action, not promises," said Karen Miles, one of the delegates, as she exited Downing Street. "We've been promised reviews and committees for years. It's gotten us nowhere." Night falls on the siege. As midnight approached, London settled into an eerie quiet. The usual hum of traffic was absent. In its place, the distant sound of lorry engines idling, generators running, drivers huddled around portable heaters. Some residents expressed anger. Business owners calculated losses. But others, surprisingly, expressed support. A bakery owner in Stratford left trays of sandwiches at a nearby blockade point. A pub in Watford opened its doors to drivers, offering free tea and bathroom access. The complexity of the situation defied easy narratives. This wasn't good versus evil. It was exhaustion versus desperation. System versus individual. The future versus the present. What happens next? As dawn broke on the second day, the question on everyone's mind was simple: how does this end? The drivers showed no signs of backing down. The government, trapped between public pressure and fiscal reality, struggled to find a solution that wouldn't set a precedent for future blockades. Meanwhile, London ran out of time. Food supplies dwindled. Hospitals operated on emergency protocols. Schools closed. The city that never stopped had stopped. And somewhere on the M25, Mark Hendricks sat in his cab, drinking cold coffee, staring at a photo of his kids, and wondering if he'd made the right choice. He thought about the nurse who couldn't reach her patients, the pregnant woman, the diabetic man. He thought about his own children and the future he wanted for them. Then he thought about the decades of being ignored, exploited, and forgotten. And he stayed exactly where he was, because sometimes the only way to be heard is to make the world stop and listen. The siege of London had begun, and no one knew how it would end.